He reached the conclusion he did.
Bill Stump carried his 6-week-old son to court to show that he's as disturbed as anyone by the death of innocent children in Oklahoma City. The judge agreed to postpone his case rather than risk a jury that might connect Stump to local militias that have been linked to the bombing. We'll be back with more news after a short break.
This is CBS News, up to the minute.
So you shoot twice to the body?
What he says may not be illegal, but is it dangerous? Has free speech gone too far? Hate radio under fire tonight on the CBS Evening News.
Vietnam, a war that to some brings back bitter memories. Have our feelings changed 20 years after the fall of Saigon? Tomorrow on CBS News, up to the minute.
Watch CBS this morning. It's breakfast for your head.
When critics argue that baseball players got all the warm-up they needed during this year's shortened spring training, after watching this next sequence, you might want to ask them to think again. The comedy of errors committed by Pittsburgh in last night's game against the Montreal Expos led to 3 runs and eventually ended up costing the Pirates the game. A French-speaking broadcaster called the play, but that didn't make it any less fun to watch.
Floyd est en course. La balle est frappée vers le 3e. Lansing s'amène. Relais au 1er. Ce n'est pas capté. Kelly s'en va au 2e. Floyd contourne le 3e. On le pousse vers le marbre. Relais au marbre. Trop tard. C'est 2 points s'ajoutent. Oh, Floyd a été atteint à la tête. Là. Kelly part du 3e. Ça vient vers le marbre. Il dit s'il est sauf.
Whoa.
It's like Casey Stengel used to say, can anybody here play this game?
Our news continues. Regular viewers of Up to the Minute may notice that our entertainment editor, Dennis Cunningham, hasn't been here for the past couple of weeks. He's been on vacation. Good for him, but still managed to take in a few movies of a very particular nature. Dennis goes behind the scenes this morning to fill us in on whether you should see them on your next vacation.
Hello there, Dennis Cunningham here, behind the scenes, as you can see, and I just got back from vacation, and yes, I do go to the movies on vacation, but, you know, for me, vacation movie-going time is dumb movie-going time. Not a scarce item at the movies these days, dumb movies. You know what I mean, movies without any pretensions, just want to make you laugh, never mind how we get the laughs, that sort of movie. You might think that's an easy thing, but actually it isn't, as you'll see, as I give you this overview here, behind the scenes, of how I spent my spring vacation.
I'll scratch your back, and I'll let you know what you can scratch.
The supremely untalented Mr. Pauly Shore hits rock bottom in his latest, a tiny dog of a movie called Jury Duty. A movie which makes a cheap, half-hearted, last-minute try to tie itself into the O.J. trial, but which is breathtakingly tasteless, all by its cheap, half-hearted, last-minute self. And now for something different, but not, unfortunately, completely different.
Hello, I'm Stuart Smalley.
Al Franken is Stuart Smalley, the support group expert. He created to a hilarious effect as a recurring Saturday Night Live sketch. But once again, a sketch does not become a movie. Even though this one dares to turn deadly serious, some movie reviewers have mistaken that daring, deadly serious turn as some degree of success. You see, Stuart Saves His Family, that's the name of the movie, is an unfunny comedy that turns into a darkly bizarre unfunny comedy, and that's not okay, I'm afraid. Next, Chris Farley stars in and as Tommy Boy, and for the sort of movie it is, it's something of a gem. For the sort of movie it is. Tommy Callahan is a well-meaning klutz of a guy, especially annoying to the ultra-efficient and sharply witty David Spade. How these two become close friends while touring the Midwest, trying to save the Callahan family business, is genuinely touching and, of course, quite funny.
All right, it's sale time, so remember, we don't take
No for an answer.
No.
Okie dokie.
I'm gonna pass.
Gotcha, thanks.
So, out of those 3 comedies of the generally fast and loose variety, and generally aimed at the younger set, it's Sorry, Pauly and Stuart Smalley, but Tommy, we're glad we knew ya. Oh, and speaking of names, I'm Dennis Cunningham for CBS News.
Where was Dennis?
Dennis was right in our building here. We have a little floral shop where the soap opera folks go.
That's our news for this half hour. He can't get enough of this place.
This is CBS News, up to the minute.
This is CBS.
In Oklahoma City, a whistle and then silence for the victims of last week's bombing.
And 50 years later, sirens bring Israel to a standstill, a pause to remember 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust. From CBS News, this is Up to the Minute. Good morning. I'm Ed Crane.
And I'm Nanette Hansen. Good morning. It is a morning for memorials. In 2 different parts of the world, victims are being remembered. In Oklahoma City yesterday, the search for victims in the remains of the federal building halted to mark the passing of a grim week. The death toll now stands at 99 people. Officials raised the count overnight. More than 100 people are still unaccounted for. Later today, suspect Timothy McVeigh will be in court for a preliminary hearing. It was yesterday that McVeigh's friend Terry Nichols related what may have been a chilling warning of what was to come. CBS News correspondent Dave Failing reports from Oklahoma City.
Well, they're asking for long johns and kerosene heaters here now as far as donations are concerned to help out the rescuers. They're having to endure 40-degree temperatures and high winds. Now, one update, fire officials are now narrowing down the number of children missing to 4. That is lower than first feared. They think all 4, though, were infants who were in their cribs when the bomb exploded here. Now, earlier there were funerals for the 13 children whose bodies have been found so far. Oklahoma City buried more of the young victims of last week's blast at the Murrah Federal Building. Aaron and Elijah Coverdale, 2 of the children who perished in the daycare center, were laid to rest. Tears flowed as young and old said goodbye to the little boys.
We live in a free society, but it's becoming too violent. A violent culture, what is God trying to say to us? We must stop the violence, and the violence will stop us.
At the site of the blast, rescue efforts stopped momentarily when Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating blew a whistle to begin a moment of silence. On Wall Street, traders also observed a moment of silence in memory of those who died at the blast. The only man charged with the bombing is remaining silent. CBS News has learned Timothy McVeigh apparently had plans to attack more federal buildings had he not been arrested. And authorities quote one of the 2 brothers under arrest as saying that he was told by Timothy McVeigh 3 days before the blast that something big is going to happen. Meanwhile, the search goes on for John Doe number 2. There have been dozens of unfounded sightings.
As far as we know now, suspect number 2 is still unknown.
At the bomb site, the search for survivors continues, with up to 200 firefighters at a time now, slowly combing the wreckage, hoping for a miracle that someone will be found alive. Coincidentally, President Clinton spoke to a firefighters convention. He told how the tragedy affected him personally.
Sunday, when Hillary and I were there, we found that even as our people mourned, there was also overwhelming gratitude for all those who were involved in the rescue effort.
Earlier in the day, the president met with bipartisan congressional leaders at the White House, announcing new measures to combat domestic terrorism. He's pushing for more law enforcement officers and stiffer penalties for violent crimes against government employees. Republican leaders sounded a note of cautious cooperation.
I think we all agree that we should move as quickly as we can, but be certain that in the process we are very careful about not trampling on anybody's constitutional rights.
Now, back here at the bomb site, some people are still holding out hope. The Red Cross tells me that one family comes down here almost every night and yells out the name of a missing loved one in hopes that she'll hear them. Nanette?
Dave, do officials have any idea how long this search is going to take, the search for victims?
They still seem to be holding tight on this weekend. They think they will have the search complete by that time. We understand that some of the federal investigative agencies like the FBI are hoping that things are sped along because they want to get in there to get clues as fast as they can. But the firefighters here say they're going to stick with it as long as they need to thoroughly go through every bit of the rubble here.
Thank you. Dave Failing reporting from Oklahoma City.
Throughout the country, silence yesterday helped mourn the dead in Oklahoma, and this morning, half a world away, the same healing process is being used to mark 6 million senseless losses. Israelis stood in silence for 2 minutes as sirens wailed in remembrance of those killed in Nazi concentration camps. Speaking at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin praised the Allied troops who 50 years ago liberated those camps. He thanked them for, quote, opening the doors of hell and bringing a day of redemption. This is CBS News, up to the minute.
Where is your father now?
Oklahoma City bombing suspect Tim McVeigh has a date in court today. He'll ask that his case be moved from Oklahoma City. Law enforcement sources now say 3 witnesses have placed McVeigh at the scene just moments before the bombing. And CBS News has learned that McVeigh may have been plotting more bombings. A federal judge has ordered material witness Terry Nichols moved to Oklahoma City. At a hearing yesterday, federal authorities disclosed that he says McVeigh told him something big is going to happen just 3 days before the explosion. New estimates say 4 children remain missing in the wreckage of Oklahoma City's federal building. There had been fears that as many as 20 more children might be discovered as searchers approached the area where the daycare center had been. They've now doubled the number of searchers working in the building at any one time. The O.J. Simpson defense team is once again suggesting there was a police department plot to frame the former football great. And the latest witness to deny involvement in such a plot, criminalist Andrea Mazzola, testified yesterday that she's not covering up for her superiors. She's back on the stand later today. And those are some of this morning's top stories from CBS News.
An airline pilot flying over Russia last night reported seeing a fireball and a column of smoke towering some 25,000 feet into the air. What the pilot was witnessing was the explosion of a natural gas pipeline some 600 miles northeast of Moscow. The explosion came in the center of Russia's oil and natural gas industry, an area not unfamiliar with industrial disasters of late. In Moscow this morning is CBS News correspondent Jonathan Sanders. And Jonathan, witnesses described this as a terrible blast. What can you tell us?
Well, Nanette, these are big, large capacity natural gas pipelines that bring natural gas out of the western Siberian fields to places across Russia, down to the south to Ukraine, and into Europe. This is one of the ways Russia earns hard currency. They're relatively modern pipelines, and so they put gas under a great deal of pressure. It's not surprising, as the infrastructure crumbles, that if something were to set one of these off, it would be a huge fireball, the way the Japanese pilot who flew over there describes. Natural gas is very flammable, a lot of it, and under pressure. Makes sense to me. I'm surprised more of this doesn't happen. The Russians did a lot of development of natural gas pipelines in the 1970s. In fact, there was a period where they were laying more natural gas pipeline every year than we laid in the entire Alaska pipeline. That's a lot of pipe, and if you don't take care of it, something's going to go wrong. We've seen things go wrong in this same region. You'll remember, Nanette, earlier this year, an oil pipeline not too far north of this place let go, and the oil just poured onto the Siberian tundra. They put up a few dams to try and hold this oil back. The dams didn't hold. It began seeping into rivers, and there was talk of an ecological disaster much bigger than the Exxon Valdez disaster. Well, it's springtime just about there, and we're very soon going to get some idea of how big the disaster is. When you're dealing with Siberia, you never know just what the extent of things is. And when you're dealing with Russians, especially when we remember we're just 9 years after the Chernobyl tragedy that was announced as being under control from the beginning, you have to watch things pretty closely to know what's going on. But so far today, in the natural gas explosion, the Russian Emergency Task Force said they shut off the pipeline. The fire is out. A few acres of forest have been scorched. Nobody has been killed, and repair work is beginning now, Nanette.
Jonathan, is this a populated region?
There's cities there where people have been brought in. This is near Utka, which is a town of about 140,000, 160,000 people. there aren't too many settlements out in the Siberian tundra. There are too many mosquitoes, too few roads, too few supplies. There are cities built out there for special purposes, most of which are connected with the natural gas and the oil riches that are in that part of the world. This is a place that could have beneath its surface as much oil and natural gas as there is in all of Saudi Arabia. The problem is it's boggy, it's Siberia, it's hard to get out, it gets to be 40 below in the winter, and it puts a lot of stress on the people and on the pipelines, so they tend to congregate together. I'm not surprised that no one was hurt if this actually happened outside of town. Unless someone's driving by, it probably didn't get anyone. It's too early for campers in that part of the world.
All right, CBS News correspondent Jonathan Sanders reporting from Moscow. Thank you.
A follow-up this morning to a story CBS News investigated earlier this year. It involves this spectacular crash of a huge B-52 bomber during flying practice last June at Fairchild Air Force Base in Washington State. The CBS News report focused on allegations that the pilot had a history of pulling stunts and violating safety rules. Yesterday, a Seattle newspaper reported the B-52 came within 50 feet of a nuclear weapons stockpile, and the pilot may have been trying to avoid it at the last moment. He and all 3 others on board were killed. More messages from the killer police are calling the Unabomber, taunting his victims. And the FBI, the man wanted since 1978, offered some new glimpses of himself and some new clues for authorities. CBS News correspondent John Blackstone has the story.
One of the letters from the Unabomber went to one of his victims, Dr. David Galertner, a computer expert at Yale University, who was injured by a mail bomb in 1993. The FBI released the letter, which revealed much about the Unabomber's thinking.
People with advanced degrees aren't as smart as they think they are. If you had had any brains, you would have realized that there are a lot of people out there who resent bitterly the way techno-nerds like you are changing the world, and you wouldn't have been dumb enough to open an unexpected package from an unknown source.
The serial bomber sent another letter meant to be published that amounts to a ransom note to society. In his letter to the New York Times, the Unabomber warns that he expects to be able to pack deadly bombs into ever smaller, more harmless-looking packages. The bomber says he'll desist from terrorist activities only if major publications print a manuscript some 37,000 words long, advocating the destruction of the worldwide industrial system.
We always understood that this was a person who wanted some degree of control, who didn't like the way things were going and wanted to change, make change.
Experts suggest it's no coincidence the Unabomber's grab for the spotlight follows so closely the destruction in Oklahoma City.
This was a challenge almost to him to try to upstage the event of last week.
In his letter, the serial bomber mocks those who have been searching for him. The FBI is a joke, he writes. The task force assigned to find the bomber couldn't say they're any closer to catching him. Their main hope now is that through his letters, someone may recognize the technically skilled and angry man who's been spreading terror for 17 years. John Blackstone, CBS News, San Francisco.
Bill Daley is a former FBI investigator who has studied the Unabomber. He is now with Kroll Associates, a firm that handles security for a number of clients, including corporations. Bill, thanks for joining us. What do you make of this Unabomber? He started out back in 1978 targeting a university professor at Northwestern outside of Chicago, and now he's moved on to a lobbyist, public relations executive. What's the connection?
Well, I think we see an individual that has multi-focuses here. He's targeting in some of his recent correspondence industrial society as a whole, and within that he's gone out specifically against airlines and about professors. He's looked at he's mentioned genetic firms. He's really put a lot of people into this mix, and as a result, virtually many corporations could be targets of his device. But what we're seeing more and more is that as he's releasing information about himself, although using the collective word we or our in his communications, we're getting a better focus on perhaps what's driving him, and hopefully be able to suggest to clients or other people how to best protect themselves.
Well, he started out in the Midwest. He moved out to the West Coast. He has targeted people all over the country. Is this a man who has a gripe with industrial people? Was he in an industrial accident, perhaps?
I think that might be a little bit too much speculation at this point. What it appears to be coming out is that he appears to be saying that professors, people in higher education, are suggesting that he's not that intelligent by things that they've written about other communications they've released, and he appears to be suggesting that they're dissing him, if we use the common word today, and he appears to be holding that as certainly a grudge, and that was released in one of the communications today by the FBI.
Now, the irony is that although he opposes technology and industrial advancement, he's a very high-tech type of person. I mean, these bombs are very sophisticated, are they not?
They have become that way, and in fact, there's been a migration and a development, maturation process, if you would, in this kind of devilish craftsmanship. And we've seen now where the devices are certainly becoming much more compact. Materials are being polished. They're finished off as if someone has, pride in their, quote, craftsmanship. And in one of his last communications released through the New York Times, he mentions that he's working on packages that will carry more explosive power packed into smaller devices, as well as being able to create larger devices that will, quote, impact the structure of buildings.
What do you tell your clients? Don't open your mail?
Well, not exactly that, but there are some things that clients or corporations, individuals can do to help protect themselves, and it's important that people who feel as though they're under some type of threat because of association with any one of these industries, or perhaps directly with some of the people who've been affected before, some steps that they can take would include simple checklist of looking at material as it comes in. There's some steps that the U.S. Postal Inspectors suggest that you look at as far as the way packages are
he doesn't
addressed.
Go to the post office. He likes to put stamps on the mail himself. Is there any way that as these packages travel through the postal system that they could be x-rayed perhaps or something like that to stop this?
Well, that's really where it comes in on the end of that process, is that within the mail system, the volume is just too great to be able to do that effectively. So what we suggest to some of our corporate clients is that, perhaps they want to get some machinery in that can look at packages. One's coming to executives, or maybe one's coming into the general employee population as a whole, and that's where some of the emphasis should be placed, is on the end process.
All right. Security consultant Bill Daly, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll have more news in a moment. This is CBS News Up to the Minute.
This morning's business report is brought to you by the NASDAQ stock market, the stock market for the next 100 years.
The cheaper dollar is likely to bring more foreign tourists to the United States. Travel agents say fears of terrorist bombings are no match for the ability to buy more with the yen, German marks, French francs, and British pounds. One German travel agent says the U.S. will be swamped with Germans and everybody else for vacations. In Tokyo, the dollar was higher against the yen, changing hands at 83.48 in late trading. On the Tokyo stock market, the Nikkei average rose 57.5 points, or more than 1/3 of 1%. Gold opened in London at $385.80 an ounce. That's down 40 cents from the New York spot close. Stock prices were marginally stronger on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrials dropped 0.34 to 42.99. Smaller stocks were up. The Nasdaq set a record high with a gain of 5.5 points. You could soon be paying a fee to deposit your check with a bank teller rather than a cash machine. First National Bank of Chicago announced that some of its customers will be paying $3 for the privilege of dealing with a real live human being beginning in June. And experts say it won't be long before more banks begin imposing similar fees. Some bosses celebrated the day with flowers. Others lost some of their best office equipment as secretaries across the country tossed it, literally. In Greenville, North Carolina, they tossed it from a cherry picker.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, drop it!
A high-speed Smashin' Fest was actually done with the help of a local radio station and store, to the cheers of all those standing at least a few feet away.
Baseball is back in business with 13 parks hosting games yesterday. In sun-drenched Yankee Stadium, the former playground of Joe DiMaggio, over 50,000 loyalists turned out to see the Bombers go deep with homers by Danny Tartabaugh and Bernie Williams. New York starter Jimmy Key got credit for the 8-6 win, raising his opening day record to a perfect 6-0. At Coors Field, the brand new home of the Colorado Rockies, over 47,000 fans braved 30-degree temperatures, and for their devotion, they were treated to a come-from-behind win over the New York Mets. It came on Dante Bichette's 3-run homer in the 14th inning.
And it's gone. Goodbye.
And in Toronto, the sellout crowd cheered the play of Devon White, who delivered two 2-run hits in the Blue Jays' 11-run second inning. Toronto rolled to an easy 13-1 win.
That's our news for this half hour.
You're watching CBS News Up to the Minute.